The knock came just as I was pouring my morning coffee, 3 firm raps that said, "I'm not here to be friendly." I opened the door to find her standing there, Verna Jacobs, head of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Good morning, Mr. Granger," she said, voice tight and sweet in the most insincere way possible. "We need to talk about your structure." I already knew what this was about. "You mean my guest house?" I asked, sipping my coffee calmly. She tilted her head like a crow examining roadkill. "Yes, let's call it that. You're in violation of Section C, Clause 12 of the Willow Creek HOA covenant. Unauthorized secondary structures are strictly prohibited." I leaned against the doorframe. "Well, lucky for me, I built it 7 years before the HOA even existed." Her eyes narrowed. "Be that as it may, we're a unified community now. And that structure disrupts the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. The board voted, it needs to be torn down within 30 days, I laughed. "You voted to rewrite history," she didn't flinch. "If you fail to comply, we'll begin fining you $500 a day. "You're serious?" I asked, genuinely impressed by her gall. She smiled like a cat that found the cream. "Very." After she left, I walked across the backyard to the guest house. It was a solid little thing, stone foundation, good roof, plumbing, electricity, the works. I built it with my own hands back when the county zoning office still had paper records, and no one knew what an HOA was. My brother and I had spent 2 summers getting it right. And now Verna wanted to erase it with a vote. I didn't just sit on that. I drove straight to the county records office that afternoon. The clerk, an older guy named Dave who practically lived in that building, pulled the folder like it was sacred. "Alexander Granger." "Yep, your permit was issued in March of 2006. Final inspection signed off in October that year. You're golden." I asked for certified copies, 3 of them. By the time I got home, there was already a violation notice taped to my front door, bright orange and screaming, "Final warning." I laughed and walked inside. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA meeting. Everyone was already gathered in the community clubhouse, sipping flavored water and pretending to be civil. Verna was at the front, flanked by her ever-loyal sidekick, Cheryl, who always looked like she was smelling something bad. "I'd like to address the board," I said, holding up the county envelope. "You're not on the agenda, Mr. Granger," Verna said, not even looking up. "I didn't ask to be," I said, unfolding the certified documents and placing them on the table. "My guest house was built and approved by the county 7 years before this HOA was even formed." She stared at the papers like they were in a foreign language. "That structure still violates the current community standards." You can't retroactively apply rules to something that predates your existence," I cut in. "Unless your HOA charter was written by time travelers." A few neighbors chuckled. Even Cheryl blinked. Verna straightened. "We will have our legal team review this." "You do that," I nodded. "Just make sure they also review Section 4 of your own bylaws. You know, the one that says any existing structures legally permitted prior to incorporation are considered grandfathered in." Her face flushed. I gave her a polite nod. Meeting adjourned. Verna didn't say a word as I packed up my documents and left the clubhouse. But the way she avoided eye contact told me one thing: she'd been counting on no one calling her bluff. By the time I got home later that night, my mailbox was stuffed with a letter from the HOA's Compliance Enforcement Committee. This time, they'd elevated the language. According to them, my non-conforming secondary dwelling posed a potential safety hazard and was subject to an immediate reassessment of structural integrity by an HOA-designated inspector. It was a new tactic and a clumsy one. I didn't wait. The next morning, I called up an old friend of mine, Elias McGill. Elias and I served as volunteers on the county zoning review board years ago, back when things were still done with manila folders and hand-stamped forms. Now he worked as a private code consultant and expert witness for land use cases. He met me at the guest house the following afternoon and gave the place a thorough once-over, crawling under the foundation, checking the wiring panels, and tapping along the walls with a rubber mallet like a surgeon with a stethoscope. "Still solid," he said, brushing dust off his jeans. "You could survive a hurricane in here. Whatever angle they're working, it's not about safety." I asked him to prepare a full inspection report and notarize it. He nodded, already pulling a legal pad from his bag. The next day, a white SUV with the HOA logo stenciled on the doors pulled up while I was raking leaves. A guy in steel toe boots and a neon vest stepped out, clipboard in hand. "You Alexander Granger?" he asked, already glancing toward the guest house. "Depends," I said. "You here to trespass or to leave?" He hesitated. "I was contracted by the HOA to do an emergency structure review." "Did you bring a court order?" I asked. He looked thrown. "No, just a authorization from the board. Not good enough," I said. "You set 1 foot past my fence line without a judge's signature, and I'll have the sheriff down here before your boot hits the grass." He backed off, muttering something about just doing his job, and got back in the SUV. I watched him drive away, then called the county sheriff's office. Deputy Harris came out later that evening. I knew him in passing. He'd once helped me get a stray goat off the roof of my truck during Fair Week, so there was no awkwardness. "They try that again, give us a call," he said after I filled him in. HOA boundaries don't override private property rights. Not without a legal injunction. I thanked him and handed him a copy of the inspection report from Elias, just in case anything escalated. It did. 3 days later, I came home from picking up lumber to find the padlock on the guest house gate cut clean through. Tools and documents were scattered across the floor inside. Someone had broken in. There was no sign of forced entry at the main door, but the window latch was busted and a boot print was smeared across the sill. I called the sheriff immediately. Detectives showed up within the hour, along with a crime scene unit. They dusted the window, photographed the boot print, and took statements from me and my neighbor, Darlene, who lived 2 lots over and had cameras pointing toward the street. She didn't hesitate. That white SUV pulled up around 2 o'clock, same one from the HOA. I didn't recognize the guy driving, but he was wearing a vest with their logo. The footage confirmed it. The timestamp, the SUV, even the guy's face, it was all there. The next day, I filed a police report for unlawful entry and property damage. The sheriff's department took it seriously, especially once I forwarded them a copy of the HOA's inspection notice from earlier that week. It was enough to prove motive. 2 days later, Detective Rios called me. We brought the guy in. Said he was told by someone on the HOA board that the structure was abandoned and they needed to secure it before it became a liability. They told him it was abandoned, I asked, stunned. Yeah, but we're not buying it. He's a contractor, not an idiot. He admitted he was paid in cash. No receipt, no invoice. That's tampering with private property, Mr. Granger. I asked if charges were being filed. They will be. But this goes higher than just one contractor. We're opening a case. A week passed without a peep from Verna. No emails, no knock on the door, nothing. It was eerie. Then, on a rainy Thursday, I got an anonymous manila envelope shoved through my mail slot. No return address, no message, just a stack of printed emails and screenshots. The first one chilled me. It was from Verna, dated 2 weeks ago, sent to the entire HOA board. Subject: Granger Property Final Solution. The email outlined a plan to reclaim the lot's accessory structure under emergency maintenance protocol, citing a made-up clause from an outdated version of the bylaws. She ended the email with, "We'll deal with any fallout once it's down." Another email showed Cheryl forwarding Verna's message to the same contractor who broke in with the note, "Use discretion, no paperwork." I stared at the stack, stunned. These weren't just overzealous neighbors. This was criminal conspiracy. I made 3 copies and drove straight to Detective Rios. He took one look at the emails and whistled low. "This is enough for a warrant. We're seizing HOA records and devices today." Within hours, Unmarked cruisers rolled into the HOA office. Officers came out with boxes of hard drives, laptops, and file folders. Verna was escorted out in handcuffs. Cheryl followed right after, shouting something about community service and doing what's right. The news hit the neighborhood like a thunderclap. By sunset, half the block had gathered outside the clubhouse, watching as the last of the files were hauled away. No one spoke. No one had to. That night, I opened a beer and sat on my porch, listening to the wind rattle the gutters. My guest house stood solid in the background, lights glowing warmly through the windows. For the first time in weeks, the air felt still, but I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The county courthouse was busier than usual that Monday morning. I parked my truck in the municipal lot, grabbed the manila folder that had become my shield over the past 2 weeks, and walked through the rain toward the building's sandstone steps. Inside, everything smelled like floor wax and old carpet. The hearing room was on the second floor, tucked behind a set of glass doors labeled Civil Arbitration Disputes and Land Use. I stepped in, nodded to the bailiff, and took a seat behind the wooden rail. The room was mostly empty. Just a few folding chairs, a long table, and a small raised platform where the magistrate would preside. I didn't have to wait long. Detective Rios entered first, carrying a thick binder under one arm and flanked by a woman in a gray suit who introduced herself as Assistant District Attorney Layla Chen. She shook my hand, short and firm. "Appreciate you coming in," she said. "We'll go over everything before the board reviews the interim findings." "Is Verna here?" I asked. "She's in holding," Chen replied. "We're not letting her anywhere near this until the arraignment." But 2 of the remaining board members have been summoned for deposition. I nodded, trying to ignore the fact that my pulse had jumped. The chair I sat in creaked as I leaned forward. Over the next hour, the hearing room filled slowly. Cheryl's replacement, a guy named Dennis with a goatee and a tie too long for his shirt, came in looking like he hadn't slept in days. Another board member, Tanya, a school librarian with a nervous tic, sat on the far edge of the row and didn't make eye contact once. The magistrate entered, a tall, lean man with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard he barely looked at before speaking. "We're here today to review claims of unlawful interference with private property, specifically in relation to the actions of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association Board. Records indicate that the complainant, Alexander Granger, has provided legal documentation of ownership and compliance with county zoning laws. Is that correct?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "Furthermore," he continued, "the county has received evidence suggesting criminal misconduct by board officers, including but not limited to conspiracy to falsify code violations, unlawful entry, and intentional destruction of private property." "Is that correct, Assistant DA Chen?" She rose. "Yes, Your Honor. We have secured digital correspondence, financial records, and contractor statements corroborating the events in question." He nodded. "Then we'll proceed with testimony." What followed felt like peeling back layers of rot. Detective Rios walked the room through the evidence one piece at a time. A printed invoice for cash disbursement without a signature. A digital copy of the fake clause Verna had inserted into the HOA newsletter, never approved by vote, never filed with the county. A time-stamped email instructing Cheryl to neutralize the structure before it becomes a precedent. Then came the kicker. Ada Chen called up a forensic accountant who had traced HOA funds to an unregistered account linked to Verna's husband, a shell company set up to receive maintenance reimbursements. Turns out, the break-in wasn't the first time they'd done this. 3 other homeowners had been intimidated into removing sheds and workshops, all within the past year, under threat of fines and property liens. Their properties had then been reassessed and had HOA fees hiked dramatically. One of the victims, a retired machinist named Harold, testified that he'd been told his tool shed was a fire hazard. They gave him 48 hours to clear it out. When he refused, they padlocked it and claimed it was condemned. 2 days later, it was bulldozed. "I didn't think I had a choice," Harold said quietly. "They said if I fought it, they'd suspend my voting rights and take me to court. I live on a fixed income." His voice cracked on that last part. The magistrate turned to Dennis and Tanya. "Did either of you authorize any of the actions taken against Mr. Granger or the other homeowners?" Dennis shifted uncomfortably. "We never saw those emails. Verna kept most decisions off the record. She said it was legal under emergency provisions." Tanya cleared her throat but still didn't look up. "She told us she was cleaning up non-conforming lots, said it was about maintaining property values." The magistrate leaned back. "So, neither of you questioned why maintenance reimbursements were being routed through a company owned by the HOA president's spouse?" Dennis looked like he wanted to disappear. "We didn't know that," Chen rose. "We're pursuing felony charges against Verna Jacobs for conspiracy, fraud, and unlawful access to private property. Pending further investigation, additional charges may be brought against any accomplices. We're also moving to freeze all HOA discretionary accounts until a full audit is completed." The magistrate nodded slowly. "Motion granted. Furthermore, I'm placing a temporary injunction on any enforcement actions by the Willow Creek HOA pending a special review board appointment. Mr. Granger's dwelling is to remain untouched." He glanced at me. "You'll be reimbursed for any damages once restitution proceedings begin." I sat down, jaw tight. The room was silent except for the scribble of pens. Outside, the rain had stopped. I walked down the courthouse steps with Ada Chen, who was already coordinating with county oversight to install a temporary administrator for the HOA. Apparently, this wasn't the first HOA in the county to get caught playing emperor behind a gated curtain. She said the DA's office had a task force for this sort of thing now funded after a similar HOA scandal 3 towns over. Back home, I found a small envelope taped to my front door. It was handwritten, no return address. Inside was a card that simply read, "We're sorry. You stood up for all of us." No name, no signature, but someone had taped a $20 bill to the back of it. That evening, I sat on the porch, not with a beer this time, but a notebook and a pen. I started jotting down names, neighbors who'd been pushed around. People who'd lost gardens or fences or old sheds full of memories. Some had been too tired to fight. Others didn't even know they could. I wasn't going to let this happen again. The next week, I filed paperwork to form a neighborhood coalition independent of the HOA focused on transparency and homeowner rights. Not a replacement, but a watchdog, a counterweight. At the first meeting held in my garage, 17 people showed up. Some brought cookies. Others brought stories. All of them brought a shared sense that something had cracked open, and for once the light was pouring in. I didn't know what would happen to Verna. The trial would take months. Maybe longer, but her name was already off the HOA roster. The signs outside the clubhouse were stripped of her face. The mailbox where she used to send out her violation letters stood empty. The guest house still stood, solid and unshaken, its windows glowing into the night. And this time, I wasn't the only one watching. The following weeks brought a quiet that didn't feel natural. The HOA's usual notices stopped arriving. The glossy newsletters with their fake smiles and flower bed contests vanished from mailboxes. The clubhouse stayed locked. The once routine patrols by self-appointed rule enforcers in golf carts dried up entirely. No one missed them, but the silence didn't last. It turned out that the HOA's corruption ran deeper than anyone had guessed. Ada Chen called me into her office one morning, 2 weeks after the hearing. She looked more focused than usual, her desk cluttered with manila folders and a laptop looping what looked like drone footage of Willow Creek. She didn't waste time. "We recovered email backups Verna thought she deleted," she said, flipping open a folder. "There's more than just financial fraud." She was coordinating with a private security firm, one not licensed in this state. I frowned. Security firm, for what? She tapped a printed email with a red stamp across the top, evidence chain of custody established. She hired them for surveillance. On you primarily. But also on 3 other residents who had previously challenged the board. My stomach turned. Surveillance, cameras, Chen nodded, and audio recording. We have confirmation that at least one listening device was planted inside a neighbor's utility box without consent. She stood and walked to a whiteboard covered in names, dates, and arrows connecting them. Verna was building a profile dossier on you, your routines, your visitors, your purchases. That's why she knew exactly when you'd be away from home during the break-in. The contractor didn't just act independently. He was told when the property would be unoccupied. I stared at the whiteboard, a slow, cold pressure building behind my ribs. Do you have enough to charge her for this? Chen didn't sit back down. Oh, we're past charges. We're moving to indict under state racketeering laws. This wasn't just a rogue board. This was organized abuse of power for personal gain. That afternoon, I signed a formal statement confirming the placement of the listening device. 2 techs from the sheriff's cybercrime team had already recovered it from a junction box near the guest house's back wall. I hadn't even noticed it, just a small plastic node buried behind conduit. Back home, I installed an exterior motion light facing the guest house and switched out the locks. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was protocol. The evening after the indictment, a community meeting was held at the local library. Not at the clubhouse, no one wanted to walk back into that place just yet. Word had spread fast. Over 60 residents showed up, crowding the folding chairs and leaning along the walls. A few even stood outside the doors, listening through open windows. I stepped up to the front, not as a victim, but as someone who had helped pull the rot out by its roots. Most of us moved here because we wanted peace, I said, voice steady. We didn't sign up for surveillance, blackmail, or having our homes treated like chess pieces. Murmurs rippled through the room. We've now seen what happens when a few people use a system built on trust to serve themselves. That ends now. From the back, Darlene raised her hand. What happens next? Are they gone for good? Ada Chen had come in quietly and now stepped forward. Verna Jacobs and her co-conspirators have been formally indicted, she said. Charges include wire fraud, conspiracy to violate civil rights, unlawful surveillance, and multiple counts of financial misconduct. Her assets have been frozen pending trial. If convicted, she's looking at serious time state prison, not some slap on the wrist. People exchanged glances. Some looked relieved, others were still processing. Chen continued. But dismantling the damage doesn't stop with arrests. You'll need to elect a provisional oversight committee. This community deserves transparency and a voice. Dennis, who had resigned from the board the week prior, stood and cleared his throat. I'd like to nominate Alex to lead the committee, he said. He stood up when the rest of us didn't. I shook my head. I'm not looking to run anything. But I'll help set it up. And I'll make damn sure no one ever uses this HOA to steamroll their neighbors again. The meeting ended with a vote to dissolve the existing HOA charter pending legal review. A temporary board was formed with 5 volunteers, none of whom had ever served under Verna. They weren't interested in power. They just wanted their neighborhood back. The next few days were filled with cleanup. The HOA's private server, which the court had ordered unlocked, revealed yet more buried misconduct, falsified landscaping violations, forged signatures on lien notices, and a spreadsheet tracking which homeowners were least likely to fight back. Some of the more vulnerable residents had been fined into financial hardship just for painting their porches the wrong shade of beige. It was all there, documented in grotesque detail. The county stepped in and nullified every lien imposed by the HOA in the past 18 months. Reimbursements were issued to those who could prove they'd paid under duress. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was the first step toward healing. One morning, a moving truck pulled up in front of Verna's former home. Her property had been seized pending asset forfeiture. The bank had reclaimed it. The front porch sat empty, no potted ferns, no wreath. Just a foreclosure notice taped to the door. No one came to say goodbye. Later that week, I received a letter from the county commissioner's office, thanking me for my role in exposing the abuses and inviting me to speak at a community advocacy panel in the fall. I declined the public spotlight, but offered to help vet future HOA charters for other neighborhoods. They accepted. The guest house stood unchanged throughout it all, solid, dignified, untouched. I replaced the broken window latch myself, just like I had when I first built it. The old stone foundation hadn't shifted an inch. A friend of mine, a war veteran and engineer, helped me install a new security system, non-invasive, but thorough. One afternoon, Harold stopped by with a thermos of coffee and a hand-drawn blueprint of the tool shed he planned to rebuild. We spread it out on my workbench and talked dimensions, support beams, ventilation. He'd lost more than wood and metal when they tore his down. This was his quiet act of defiance. I told him I'd help him build it. By midsummer, the Temporary Oversight Committee finalized a community charter that barred any future HOA from enforcing retroactive rules, issuing fines without third-party review, or using outside contractors without resident approval. It passed unanimously. People started planting again. Front yards filled with raised beds, gnome statues, solar lights, things that would have once earned them warnings. Now they earned compliments. One day, as I was painting the doorframe of the guest house a fresh dark green, a little girl from 2 houses down walked by with her mother. She stopped, tugged at her mom's sleeve, and pointed. "Is that the secret house?" she asked. Her mother smiled. "That's the house that saved the neighborhood." I didn't correct her. I just waved and went back to painting.